Well as actually thank everyone for attending yesterday's workshop because I intentionally decided to divide these two workshops just considering it was important to understand the actual concepts that are implemented for outcome assessment reports. And then after you understand the concept, start to understand what skills are needed. I'm pretty sure everyone is tired of hearing my voice, so I would like everyone to give their undivided attention to the three guest speakers / panelists that we have today, Larry Thacker, Dr. Sellers, as well as Dr. Drossman. And as everyone knows, I am Salim McDowell, the Director of Assessment. And at this moment, I know I just introduced each of the panelists individually, but I would like the panelists just take a few seconds to tell everyone who you are, how long you have been working at the institution, and what do you do here at LMU? Yes, sir.
I'm Dean Martin Sellers. I am Dean of Arts and Humanities, Avery Hall, Avery Building. I came here in 2002, left in 2006 and a half, came back about 3 years ago. I worked for a year as Dean of Research before becoming Dean of Arts and Humanities. Assessment has always been something very interesting to me. The way I think about it, I'm very simple about these kind of things. If I go to the doctor, takes my blood pressure, gives me pills. I go home, take the pills for a week, come back, takes the pressure. He either sees a change or doesn't see a change. Sees a change, he continues on that same medical approach. Doesn't see a change, does something different. The assessment is going back, having the doctor look at me again, telling me how the change affected or didn't affect whatever it is that I was expecting. If it did affect it in a positive way, fine, stay on that road. If not, we need to do something different. Now, health, in my view, good health is the same as excellence in learning. That's the difference. The students that come over here, and you all know this, I'm not singing to the choir here. Students that come to us, they expect and we're responsible for ensuring excellence in learning. And the way we know that as academics and as administrators, the administrator in financial aid is the same with regard to assessment as a faculty person teaching history. The way we know excellence is happening is by getting that feedback, knowing in advance what we expected, and seeing it, determining through certain ways of testing metrics that we met our expectations or not. The expectations come about because of, I'm probably going too far here, sorry. Expectations come about because we are experts in everything. Okay, that's it. Sorry, I had too much coffee.
I'm Emil Jarsper. I'm Dean of Math and Sciences. I've been here since 2010, and the role that I'm in previously, another institution, I was responsible for a fair amount of assessment and work in institutional effectiveness, and had a wonderful mentor there who was our SACS liaison and director of assessment. She was an English teacher in a former life, and so she taught us well, and she expected us to perform to her level of expectation. And so we learned a few things from Marilyn Palmer, wonderful assessment teacher. So anyway, we'll be glad to speak to the things we have and answer questions as well.
I'm Larry Thacker. I serve as Associate Dean of Students in the Office of Student Services, which is mostly 90% of the time an undergraduate-related department. My first exposure to LMU experience was from 1987 to 91 when I was an undergraduate in the history department, and then was lucky enough to be able to come back in 2000, so I'm finishing my 14th year at LMU now. And during those 14 years so far, I think to the benefit, I knew LMU pre-outcomes assessments versus post-outcomes assessment, which is a really two very different worlds if you were here during the time period before outcomes assessments were introduced to us as a means of guiding what we did. And we can get more of that later, I guess. But it was organizationally, looking back on it, it was a much more chaotic, less directed time of what are we doing, why are we doing it, what might we do, what needs work, what should we sustain, versus implementing the outcomes assessments.
That was great. Everyone, thank you very much for your introduction. So the first slide is self-explanatory. I'll move on to knowledge from others' insight. To just piggyback on some of the insights that introduced to us so far. Please bear with me.
Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense.
So, for those who attended yesterday's workshop, as y'all noticed, I'm definitely a Star Wars fan, and I intentionally included different lines from Star Wars. I have an analogy well, including humor, I'll have an analogy that we are all Jedis in our own world. Kim, you are the leader for finance. You're a Jedi for finance. Dr. Thompson, you're a leader in a lot of things. VHS, VMT, which is magnificent. Philip, you're a leader of QEP. The panelists that we have today, they are leaders. They are Jedi Masters within their respective fields. And as mentioned before, we definitely want to gain their insight as much as possible to see exactly how.
I like the lightsaber.
Which color?
Don't you have the app? Come on.
I get that.
This is fantastic. Humor is definitely needed. So if I would love all of us to, if possible, break a smile, break a smirk. Even if you want to clap a little bit, that's fantastic. Just the world of higher ed is not just being intellectual, but it's also at times showing the amount of humor that you have. Okay, words of wisdom. If faculty members have not been acculturated into the world of professional higher ed jargon, they will be put off by the lingo. Additionally, if they find the words to be unattractive, they may view those who utter it as aliens from planet administration. And this quote derives from Dr. Judith Shapiro. So, let's not phone his home, ET, but instead phone the panelists. However, before we call the panelists, let's review a few things. And those things are some necessary skills required to effectively complete reports. A total of 5 things I would say to get started. 1 is being diligent. 2 is being meticulous. 3 is being patient. 4, being willing to accept constructive criticism, then actively apply comments. And the 5th is communication. So the first question for today's panelists is, why do you think the mentioned skills are necessary to complete outcome assessment reports? And Dr. Summers, you could go first.
Well, considering the five skills, I picked out 2 that I thought were more important than the others. The first 3 certainly are important, diligence, meticulous. But I think most of us in the room, through our formal education, have become organized, methodical, diligent, meticulous, and so on. I think the things that in my world have been difficult to overcome and see in the same as others is willingness to accept constructive criticism, because I'm always right. Particularly if an administrator comes to me as a faculty and suggests that I'm not sure where you're coming from, the administrator. And then also communications. I'm pretty sure I could communicate better if I put my mind to it. And communication links, certainly today we have so many of them, through technology. You know, we use email, like, as an example, we use email a lot of times. I have a golden rule, and that is, after the third email, it's time for a meeting. I'm not going beyond 3. That's 1, 2, 3, let's say 4, and then I have to meet face to face. So much gets lost, as we know, or is not communicated, or not communicated properly in that what's, for some of us, is somewhat of a foreign communication. I grew up, it wasn't, when I was working in other jobs earlier in my life, it was memorandum typed by someone in a typing pool, you know. So communications is very important. Then there's also, in part of communications, is my acceptance of responsibility and constructive criticism. There is this human quality where we're a little concerned about reaching out to your office sometimes, because I don't want it to be seen like I don't know it already. I don't want it, and I certainly don't want anyone to look under the rug and see the dirt that I've collected under there over a number of years, not knowing any better sometimes, you know. So my communications can be obstructed by the fact that I have those concerns or fears, if you will. That might be too strong a word. But certainly that's limiting. Now, if I can turn the table on that and think of it that everything I can do along with your help as an administrator, your office, to, you know, we hear the word transparency a lot. Sometimes, you know, we hear these sort of jargon words, transparency. But I think of it that way. If I can be as transparent as possible and even uncover my own mistakes, some of which I didn't know I made, then that can only be a help at some point. And I think that, as an administrator now, when I see that in others, I look at that as a positive characteristic. Someone who's willing to bear their mistakes in hopefulness of correcting. I see that as a very, in education, I think that's a positive. We expect that from our students. They make mistakes and we give them back a paper, and some of them, not all, but some of them, hopefully many, take those mistakes to heart and fix whatever was wrong and then go on and have learned from it. So I think those two last characteristics that you mentioned, skills, I see as essential.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. Dr. Johnson?
One of the things that I think that comes to the forefront for me in outcomes assessment as it relates to institutional effectiveness is that we are indeed in a process of trying to make things better and better and better, this continuous improvement kind of thing. And so the accepting constructive criticism goes directly to something that most of us in the academic realm, especially at the advanced degree level, should have experience in and be proficient in offering, and that is peer review. So peer review has its value where constructive criticism is received as well as given. And it's a necessity that truly can't be underestimated. And in that, there has to be the communication, clear communication, precise communication. And so those are both obviously very, very key, as Dr. Scheller just said. Being diligent, things have to happen at certain times. And when you're doing assessment, you can't go back and do it again when you're assessing, for instance, graduating students. You know, you don't call back and say, oh, by the way, sorry, you've got to come back because we didn't get this done when you were here, and we still need that data. But so you have a critical time at which certain things have to be done so that we can collect the data we need to make these data-driven decisions, which I fully believe in. We have to be diligent to make that happen. We have to plan it. We have to be prepared for it so that we get the data collected. We have to be diligent to then take the data, obviously, and look through it, process it, think about it, and apply it appropriately. Sharing it, talking through it, that kind of thing. Meticulous processes are important so that we get valid data, but also words are so powerful that as we go through and we say we're going to do certain things, and we follow up and talk about what they mean, we need to be, excuse me, we need to be real careful and meticulous to get all those details appropriately recorded and communicated out to the people that need that information, which may be faculty, staff, administrators, as we all work together with the objective of improving the student experience, the student learning, and obviously the student outcomes as they complete our programs for which we're responsible for. Patient. Patience, it has a place, as does flexibility, but there's also an end of it too. And certain things have to be done, as I said earlier, and I think probably being gracious in that patience is a very key part of the patience. So I'll shut up and let Larry add his thoughts.
What can I add to all of that? I'll try to say something different. It's good and bad to go last. So, in reference to diligence, in student services and in lots of administrative departments, we are encouraged, and hopefully we are, taking care of midterm outcomes assessments, because a lot happens within a semester. And in student services, as an example, each semester is a duplication of the other. Therefore, if you want to go through the self-inflicted stress of collecting data and trying to interpret it, at the end of the academic year on things that happened months and a semester ago, then be our guest, but that's unnecessary stress on yourselves. And the meticulous requirements will not be met in the process of doing that. So I think as far as personal diligence goes with outcomes, it's a year-long process. Unless we have certain cues around us in our work environment and within the culture of the department, we forget about them easily. So my suggestion to you is to take Form 3, Column 3, which is your recommendation for the next year, and have it expanded out to where you can read it easily, and have it somewhere where it reminds you, so that you can say, here, my window of opportunity for this particular event is only this 2-week period in the middle of the second semester. Because if you come back after that and you've missed the opportunity, then you can be scrambling around. And what I tell students, that nervous pit that you feel in your stomach, called anxiety, accumulating anxiety, that everyone experiences, well, outcomes assessments are a great way of experiencing that. So, if you get behind, but if you're diligent within the culture of your department and talk about it regularly, and not avoid it like a plague topic, then we can become so intimately dependent on outcomes that it tells us what we have to do, which is what helps us. So if outcomes are being done properly and approached, I think emotionally in certain ways, outcomes make us better because it tells us what to do. It's like our cultural dependence on the mission statement. If what we're doing doesn't coincide in some way with the mission statement, then we're doing the wrong thing. Same thing with your outcomes assessments. They should guide you meticulously through every week of all year long. So that's diligence. Meticulous. There are not a whole lot of transferable skills that I took with me out of the Army when I got out. It was the field of interrogation and debriefing. But what they did teach me that I use regularly is the what else question. They taught us to pursue the interrogatives, who, what, when, where, why, how, which is also what we should be teaching our students. There's always another question. If you have this data, you ask, what else? Have I exhausted what I need to ask? Who else could be involved? What else do we need to do? When else is this necessary? So I think that asking those questions of what else constantly through the collection of data and interpreting it, I think is important. So that helps us be meticulous. obviously. And we're really preaching to the choir with every one of these statements. I mean, that's, patient, like any department, academic or non-academic administrative, I call up Rick. I have some compadres at student services here today. Call up Rick and I ask about a certain event that took place, and he says, hold on, Turner was also involved with that. Let's talk about trying to get that together. So if I wait too long and I procrastinate, and I needed it yesterday already, and I'm calling Rick about it, and I'm stressed about needing the information, and then he's calling because he feels pressured to get a hold of Turner, who then feels pressured out of the blue, and most of that anxiety has been caused by me because I put off requesting that conversation too long, then that's just avoidable. So, patience, but there's a time and place where you, like Dr. Joshua said, there's an end to patience. The week before Salim needs our reports is like not the time, obviously, to remember that we're doing them. So, patience appropriately applied is essential, obviously. Willing to accept it. I replaced the word criticism with cooperation and contribution. That's really what it's about. If we have thin skins, we're probably in the wrong business. Because if it's constructive, that implies it's accurate and efficient information and it's needed. So we probably will benefit from the willingness to accept constructive criticism. And then communication is so obvious. I think I'm done.
Thank you very much. The first question was definitely answered with more than sufficiency. It was definitely valuable, extremely valuable. So we will move on to the second question. Dr. Sellers, would you mind reading the second question?
Question 2, how has the Office of Institutional Effectiveness aided you in completion of outcomes assessments?
And before we answer, I would like everyone to keep in mind that the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, OIE, serves 4 general functions: strategic planning, institutional research, which John Moore, the Assistant Director of Institutional Research, is directly responsible for, institutional assessment, which I'm responsible for, and aiding with the continued accreditation of our university, in particular, the SAC-COC accreditation. And more particularly, John and I, we both help each other with accreditation as well as strategic planning. Just want to remind everyone of that.
Well, the office obviously is there all the time. You referred earlier about not necessarily always wanting to bother them with questions, but they're there waiting on us to ask questions. So obviously we need to use that. We don't know, they may have only gotten 5 phone calls about the same question that day, or 100.
We love questions.
They do. They've been nothing but friendly and cooperative and encouraging from the beginning. I think that the greatest benefit is that once we finish with these reams of reports, it all starts to bleed together and it starts to sound the same. We've let our coworkers look at it, and we think we're about to hit enter and send it, right? And where you can no longer send the report. They're the ones that are going to look at it with a fine-tooth comb, which takes a certain kind of human being to be able to do to begin with, and then get it back to us with the details looked at even closer so that we know everything down to grammar, typos, missing information, all the small things. So I really appreciate that it doesn't let up the pressure of sending a complete report. But when we do miss things, or if that what else is needed, we want to depend on them to get back to us in a timely manner, which they always do, and to assist in making it a airtight report.
Thank you.
I would agree wholeheartedly with the idea that they are alongside of us and helping us produce a product that captures what is happening and what needs to happen, and also the aspect of accountability that we do have times at which things have to be done so that we are meeting the expectations of reporting and really being able to have a place in which we say we've reflected, we've determined what needs to improve, we've determined what is going well, and we can maybe refocus some energy and some resources, or maybe we need to redouble our efforts on certain things. And that accountability from the office is very valuable, along with that walking alongside to put a proper report together and to really answer all the aspects that need to be in there. If you've ever looked at the SACS standards and looked at all the sub 3.3.1.1, 1.2, and all this stuff, and trying to make sure that we really do have the documentation that we are doing those things, and somebody can walk in and say, show it to me, and we can say, here you go. We've got all those .1, .2, .3, .4, and so on. That's a really great thing, rather than somebody saying, they don't have any evidence that this is happening. That's a really bad place to be. So there's, as an institution, that aspect's wonderful, but really focus back on student learning and the student experience. It really does help us, and we're in this together to have that experience improving and improving and improving. So there's great value to working together.
You're quiet, that means I'm up.
You're up. You get the back clean up.
Back with that clean. Well, as Emil or Dr. Joshua mentioned, how important it is to have all the information you need at hand that the Southern Association requires of us is incredibly important today, in today's world. So I had the unfortunate experience. I went to a college a few years back as an administrator, and the president said to me, and I saw right off, they did not have an Office of Institutional Effectiveness. They had one person, who weighed about 500 pounds, who would collect information from North Central, it was a different region at that time, North Central, and he would distribute, but it was unfunctional. So I went to her and I said, you don't have any of these 4 functions except collecting some information from North Central. She said, okay, figure it out, develop it, and bring it back to me. And that's always a risk, because I did, figured it out, developed it, brought it back. She looked at it and said, this is wonderful. Take over, you know, so you get that hat put on you. I learned a great lesson from that. But anyway, so I became intimately aware of, and so when I think of these functions, I've told Salim and John, and by the way, John has been a terrific help in developing the Office of Institutional Effectiveness in so many ways. I've mentioned to Esquire, McDowell, and ABD Moore how strategic, now think about this, their office deals with strategic planning, right? You know what that is. Many of you in here have been to the strategic planning meeting. That's a university-wide meeting. Institutional research, which develops for the president and the cabinet, very important statistical information. And it's not just enrollment, but it has a lot to do with demographics and so many other, who's coming from what backgrounds and income levels and athletics. I mean, you know, and that's the information that decision makers depend upon. And then there's, of course, institutional assessment, which is not only outcomes assessment, but we shake our heads when we hear this, but there are so many surveys that come out. But if you think about those individual surveys, student opinion surveys and NESE, we just had a facility survey recently, these are extremely important for us to gain a mirror picture of where we stand with regard to how the university is accomplishing what we think it needs to accomplish. And then, of course, as Dr. Joshua mentioned, the accreditation process, there's 3.3 and so on all the way through, and then in the 2s also, there's so much to that we have to be aware of. There are schools that are under the eye of Sun Association, right now, some of our neighbors that are not very good condition, either fiscally or academically, because they're not doing some of the things that we are doing. And I'm thankful that Dr. Hess for so many years has been involved with accreditation and is intimately aware of it, as some of us all are here, to keep us out of that hotbed of controversy. But anyway, I think of this, be it as it may, I think of the Office of Institutional Effectiveness as kind of a core office to inform us, and then to which we inform, where decision makers, like all of us, can gather information and make informed, as Dr. Johnston said, data-driven decisions. It's a critical entity for the university, and I appreciate all you do.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
No problem.
Dr. Drosser, would you mind reading the third question?
I will, as long as it matches my paper. How would you describe the importance of collaboration throughout the outcomes assessment process, especially amongst OIE, or faculty within your respective school and or program? I'm a very strong believer in collaboration, and especially as we can interdisciplinarily work. The thing that I see as far as importance is that people need to be invested in the goals and how we effectively describe our goals and how we effectively assess them. Figure out the metrics, figure out the process in which you assess these things. One of the kinds of things that we've been going around about in one particular department is that we have a certain assessment we use, and it's been hovering at a particular level for a long time. But in the past, that information was not getting to the faculty, and so they're somewhat surprised by the results of that particular metric. Also in looking at the terminology, the words that have been put together in a plan that's been sitting there for a while, it's as assessments evolve nationally and some things like that that we use, the specific types of information in the discipline that are being asked and articulated that we are assessing and trying to make sure that our students know, and that we're basically preparing them to know, they change, they evolve. And if you don't keep up with that aspect through the collaborative process and everybody's on the same page with it, then you end up having kind of an outmoded, disconnected goal that you're trying to reach to that doesn't mean anything today because it's changed. So having everyone informed and knowing what the results are helps to truly have that group working on it together rather than just one person trying to collect the data, put a report together and hand the report over and maybe not thinking about it again. So it's really important to really have all in the unit involved, knowledgeable, and providing input. This year we've gone through one of our programs and have completely revamped the entire learning outcomes portion of the plan. As well as last year we put together an operational kind of plan with the steps in it. And that helps, you have some benchmarks. You're saying, well, we're trying to get here. And previously they weren't there. But that's through collaboration and using the discipline-specific knowledge that all the members bring to that process. So, very valuable.
Thank you, Dr. J. Larry.
I was just feeling a bit depressed when I realized that my first exposure to the word collaboration was probably a Vanilla Ice song. The first line of Ice. That was a long time. I'm not sure that went over like I thought it would.
This one was a classic, don't try.
Those older ones. It's in my hand.
You mentioned surveying earlier, and we are, whether we realize it or not, we are we are data dependent, survey dependent, and if we're not surveying, if we're all not surveying something, we're probably wrong. There's such a thing as survey fatigue, obviously. But since we know that all students don't take all surveys, then hopefully that is out. So, somebody out there right now has a line in their outcomes about survey participation improvement, probably.
Our office.
Yes. Yeah, even down to the smallest details like that. So like I alluded to earlier with folks within student services, we're very dependent on each other. As far as surveying goes, there are so many instruments out there that are being used. Online surveying, hard copy surveying, and so many similar and different names for each tool. You have to have one place where it's all pulled together and depend on it in order to pull information out. It's like, for example, very quickly, we started using the triangulation report last year, was it? I think last year was the first full year of use of it, which is 3 major surveys, and we're trying to figure out, okay, what's overlapping, what's very different, why are they different? But it's 3 major survey tools that we can get an idea of some pretty specific things. Now, this year when I go back and I pulled out, there may be this 50-question survey that's great overall, but I only need 2 questions worth of data out of it. But if I don't have assistance with getting to it and finding it, then I'll never know it's there. But I could really get something great from it. This year, however, on the new overall triangulation report, some of the questions that are highlighted aren't an issue anymore. They're still out there in some surveys. So I'm going to have to depend on you guys to help me find that same information that isn't necessarily on the report this time. So that's not something you do in 3 or 4 days before the report's due. You know, this just takes a lot of collaboration. So I think
And if I can add, if you don't mind, you said survey fatigue, but also on the administration side, I can give you too much data. So our office needs to be reliant upon you all, for Dr. Jarvis to say, hey, I'm looking at these things. Do you have any data specifically for my area? Instead of me sending him 50 pages of information, I can't read his mind. So with collaboration, just that communication of what you're, as Salim says, y'all are the Jedis. You know what information you need. How can we assist if you can't find that information in a sufficient amount of time? So I just,
can I also throw in there a plug for one of the instruments is the CIRP, if you're familiar with the CIRP. It's an underutilized survey that we have access to. We've been doing this for over 20 years. And it's 95% of the questions are the same over the course of that entire time. So we can go back 2.5 decades and see what our freshmen, our first-time full-time freshmen were thinking as a culture to LMU 25 years ago versus this academic year, which is eye-opening on some things. Everything from political leanings to self-reporting preparedness for college, everything you could think of. I think it's a long survey. They take it, all of our UAC 100 students take this, and it averages about somewhere between 90 and 110 surveys a year. They have that available now, and it might tell you quite a bit about the incoming class. So if I put a plug in for encouraging people to use that.
This is all fascinating. I hope everyone is as fascinated by this. Although I work in the office, just hearing the insight from the masters, the Jedis, in regards to their particular discipline, it always fascinates me personally and professionally. So I really hope that everyone is as fascinated and certainly is just listening attentively and is more than eager to apply all the knowledge that is being gained today. Dr. Summers.
yeah, I want to give an example of collaboration. A number of us are working on a Title III grant. It's from the Department of Education. It has to do with helping to affirm and strengthen the university. That's how they speak of it. So Salim and John and I were tasked with determining outcomes and expectations and measurements for the outcomes of the grant. There's 7 areas in the grant. One of the areas is coming up with the outcomes. So we got together, put our heads together in room 214 in Avery one day for about 2 hours and went through.
Several days.
Several days. Well, this one day we went through and we realized that the outcomes we were building were predicated upon the outcomes for the CTLE, which, as you know, is the Teaching and Learning unit, which is led by Beth and Erica. Beth Jaginski and Erica. So when we look at those outcomes, we realized that the outcomes were not quite, they weren't quite as strong as they could be for us to then create outcomes for the grant. So Salim went over to them a couple days later and spent hours with those folks in CTLE and revised the outcomes that they look at for their purposes for that unit. It's an administrative unit, right? And then came back. We then reevaluated what we had done and placed that information in this draft form for the grant. Now, what we did for the outcomes for the grant or academic kinds of things, what they were doing for the CTLE are administrative outcomes. But they had to relate to one another. The CTLE is a major component for helping to train faculty on technological kinds of things, which is what the grant is all about. So there's a close collaborative effort between 3 different units, if you will, if not 4, in order to assure that the outcomes would have metrics, expectations, be able to be measured, and somehow make sense between those 2. I just thought I'd share that one example.
I think it's a great example. It puts everything into a very good, solid, substantive context. Thank you for giving that example. John, if you don't mind, would you like to share any concrete perspective about collaboration?
Well, I would just add on that, you know, not only are the committee members, but once the Title III grant is, the draft is done, we'll have to ask Kim's help to go over the financial piece, and then Dr. Hess's help, which is who's not on the committee, to look. I mean, it's not just this committee members who determine whether it's feasible or not. Once that draft is done, then you extend the collaboration to the whole university, because the grant is for the whole university.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so the 4th question, Larry, would you like to read the 4th question?
What do you think about the importance of outcomes assessments, especially as they pertain to the continued academic enhancement of LMU, respective academic and or administrative programs, and the subsequent impact on students academically and professionally?
I know it's a lot in one question. Anyone.
That's fine.
I think we've already mentioned that they're our guides. That is what are we doing that's working? Well, in the counseling field, Mark, it's what's working and what's not. What's working, let's continue doing it. What's not, let's stop. Okay? And what's the process by which we stop, and what's the process by which we continue and improve? And that's the process for everything. So I liken outcomes assessments to a SWOT analysis, only on a huge scale. And Dr. Sellers, you're the expert on SWOT analysis because he leads us in our strategic retreat every year. He leads the SWOT analysis portion of the event. And you really, what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, internally and externally? And it's kind of what you're doing constantly with every objective and then every step within an objective. And in your recommendations for the coming year, what you're trying to do is, how do you overcome threats? How do you enhance, what's going very well? But more importantly, is how have you determined what is and isn't working? If it's just, well, we feel pretty good about this, then obviously that's not going to fly, because when the sex accreditation team comes in and they do a blind opening of this report and they go, Let's go talk to Larry Thacker about how he keeps records, disciplinary files. It could be that random. So that SWOT analysis approach, as well as empathizing with someone who would sit on the other side of the table with you and nitpick your responsibilities within a department. If you were conducting an operational audit of someone and you were on that visiting team, what would you like to know and where do you know the holes exist? And then, utilize all 20 fingers and toes to begin to reach out and address what you find out.
Larry, actually, thank you very much for your analogies. I have a thought about analogies. I think when you're able to apply various analogies, especially to a complicated concept, that truly shows an involved way of understanding that concept. And I definitely appreciate and value those analogies, and I hope everyone else does too. I guess the two of you can choose who would like to answer the question first.
And then we're first.
Go for it. It's all yours.
Actually, what I wanted to ask was, of all of you in the audience, in this group, who can tell me, or who can tell us, how you found outcomes assessment to be a useful impact on students, let's say? How would you describe that in your area? Anybody? Nobody finds it useful.
Well, I can say something about education because we are so standards driven because of our, the licensure requirements we have and our accredited bodies, the requirements we have. And our students live or die by those practice exams. So, and that's something that we're constantly looking at is, are we teaching what we need to be teaching so that they can go out and pass those exams and make it, even if they pass all their coursework, the state requires they pass these standardized tests to apply for their licensure. So and they're constantly in a state of flux. So we have to keep up with that. And that's a place that we start generally.
I know you're because it's almost, I hate to say do or die.
It is do or die.
You're always assessing prior to that to see where they stand, how they're accomplishing. Education and nursing, when you think about assessment, I think of those two areas because they were in that field long before I think any of the rest of us. There's the medical field as well as education. Who else? You found assessments, yes, it's important academically. You found an impact. Dr. Carucci, what about it? Anything?
I would say more than it shows us something new about our program, we work so closely with our students because it's such a small program. I work one-on-one with all of them. It does more of a reinforcement of ideas, of this is where our program needs to grow. And it helps us document it for us to, again, just to further grow our program, rather than really tell us new information about what we think, particularly about our smaller program, where we're all working one-on-one with those students on a weekly basis, some of them a daily basis.
Has anybody done a survey as one of your objectives, one of your assessments, and found, in fact, you were surprised by something that you found from the students, and then made a change? Dr. Pepperworth, I know you probably found this.
Yeah, we have. During our graduating seniors survey, one of our open-ended questions, what would you change about the department? And we've had several, say, well, strength and conditioning, minor, so we've added that, and just various things like that for, how we change within the next year or two.
And
That's an excellent example. That's an excellent example.
It definitely is, Dr. Sellers. Thank you both. With that last example, I definitely want to emphasize the concept that was mentioned at yesterday's workshop, which is having actionable data rather than having warehouse data. What you just mentioned is an ideal, not just ideal, but ideal and realistic example of having actionable data. You have assessed your students via a particular assessment method. You have results, and rather than just sitting on those results, warehouse data, you have actively implemented those suggestions. And that is just a great example of assessment at its finest, without a doubt. And we only have 5 minutes left. There's a class coming in at 1, so we have one last question. If the panelists do not mind, please do your best to answer the question within less than a minute. It's an endeavor, but let's not do it. Okay, so I'll read the 5th question, the last question. Why do you think the notion of being proactive throughout the outcome assessment process is important?
You spoke too much earlier, I'm sorry.
Well, I already mentioned, and several of us did address the diligent part of this. I think proactive speaks more to planning and that you're going to get the stuff done at the appropriate time and really take it seriously, really look at it, reflect on it. If you're doing everything in a hurry and at the last minute to just meet a deadline, you really will not take the time to reflect on what it means and maybe discuss it with other people to reflect on what it means and how you move forward. So that proactive, you're getting out there and you're really engaging it sooner than you have to, so it can have more meaning.
Thank you, Dr. Yosef. Punted to Dr. Sutton.
I think Dr. Jarsper said it very well. I really don't have anything else to say. I think he's exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Keep some reminder in the office area that they exist and they're there and they need attention regularly. And if you have that, then you will be proactive. You won't miss opportunities.
And it helps to ensure quality. Like you said, if you rush it through, then it's not going to be the most quality report that can be actionable for use.
Thank you, John. Questions and answers. We only have a minute and a half, so does anyone here have one question? Please do not hesitate to ask. All right.
I have a question. Are all outcome assessments due at the same time for each across campus? Are they due at the same time?
That's actually a great question. Academic assessment reports are due in May, and then administrative reports are actually due in June. And the reason for that, it pertains to the academic year, how results should be available by that time, by the ending of May. Of course, there are some programs that may not have results until the midsummer, but that's reasonably understood depending on the particular assessment methods that will be utilized. Such as one program that comes to mind immediately is social work. They have an exam where results are not released, I think, until June or July, and of course the program chair, Dr. Paris, she has to take the reasonable amount of time to understand the results and then include it within the reports. However, although she will not be submitting a close to being finalized report until the halfway mark of the summer, she still has to include at least a draft version of that report in May. All right. Any other questions? Let's thank the panelists. Standing ovation, please. And before we leave, I have one last link to share with everyone. Please bear with me.
The Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense.
So as Yoda says, the Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and events. Let's use the Force that we have as Jedi Masters for the knowledge and events of outcome assessment reports. And I hope everyone has realized that the reports that you complete does not only impact your direct office, but it impacts our entire university. Because if we continue to work together in a collaborative environment like we need to, and as we should be doing, then there's nothing but progress in the future for our institution as a whole, especially the students of LMU. So I would definitely like to thank each and every one of you for attending yesterday's workshops as well as today's workshops. And I certainly look forward to continuing our collaboration and our productivity working together, whether it's speaking over the phone, via email, or even having conversations in person. Thank you very much, everyone.